everyone. My name is Alex, and today we are going to be continuing our web series about how cooking and preparing your Thanksgiving turkey is just like the writing process. So today we are going on to the exciting step of cooking your turkey. Um, Very excited to go through this with you guys. Um, but basically, we're going to kind of talk about some of the processes of cooking the turkey that you have to kind of keep in mind and kind of connecting them to how you should be considering your own writing processes and how you could perhaps improve the writing processes that you already have. So, as we are moving forward, there's a couple of really important key details to keep in mind as you're cooking your turkey. The first one being is that the cooking time is going to vary by weight. So when you have your turkey, depending on if you're cooking a 12-pound bird or a small turkey breast, you're going to have to cook and approach your cooking method a little bit differently depending on the size of the bird. You may have to adjust the cook times. If you were to set your big turkey into the same cook time as your really, really small breast, likely that turkey breast is going to burn and be set aflame in a very glorious grease fire. And you don't want that. So, uh, as you're kind of thinking about your writing process, uh, I find a lot of students doing the reverse in terms of like their cook times for their papers. Many students will think about writing their papers, thinking about cooking it as a small turkey breast instead of the large bird that it is. So when you're writing a 12-page paper, that's naturally going to take much longer to cook, and it might be much more involved process. So do keep that in mind that as your papers get longer and more complexity is added to them, you should be adding more cook time and kind of keeping an eye on that precious bird. Another thing that you have to kind of consider when you're cooking your turkey is how and when to put in that foiled tent. When you're cooking turkeys, the foil tent is mostly to prevent dryness, and it kind of keeps the moisture in. In a way, it kind of acts as a shield to prevent the turkey from getting too like burnt up on the outside while still cooking the inside and keeping that moisture in. Basically, you want to do something similar as you are writing your paper. You want to keep those qualities, ideas in your paper and have them cook slowly. You want to make sure that, especially depending on the paper, you'll likely be asked to put in some of your own thoughts and interpretations and analyses into the work that you're doing. So, as you're kind of considering going forward, you want to make sure that you're marinating your ideas slowly throughout the paper, that you're not putting all of the good ideas up front towards the surface of your paper, because otherwise it'll kind of burn up quick. And then as we dive deeper and cut into the turkey, it may end up being raw because all the good ideas have been talked about so quickly that they didn't have time to really get in and cook the rest of the turkey. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as you are kind of cooking your papers in a sense that you'll want to kind of take your time developing the ideas and take the time to walk your readers through your thought process so that they understand exactly what it is you're saying. Another important part of cooking the turkey is to baste the turkey. Basting is a process where you're taking those flavors from the turkey, like the extra grease and the juices that come out of the turkey, and kind of reincorporating that back in. In some cases, it kind of gives the turkey some extra flavor. And I like to think of basting in terms of it's very similar to the research process because it's something that you kind of have to continually do to make sure that your argument is rich and flavorful. So you may actually have to go back to your paper and maybe even go back to the databases, go back to your annotated bibliography, and kind of check and make sure that you're making the best argument possible and incorporating the best sources possible. It may mean that you're going back to look for more information to give your turkey a more robust flavor. Sometimes, as you're writing your paper, you may actually need to go back and repeat that process a couple of times. As much as I wish I could say that writing a paper is very streamlined and it's a very straight path, sometimes writing is recursive in that you have to go back and, you know, go back to pre-writing strategies and go back to research processes to make sure that you're hitting all the important points. Avoiding a grease fire is very important to cooking your turkey. Basically, if you have too much grease that spills over the pan and into the oven, that can cause a pretty nasty fire and one that you can't necessarily put out with water. You'll have to find an alternative way to put out that grease fire. So I like to liken that like what happens when a turkey gets too greasy or that there's, not enough support in the pan to hold all that grease in there. I liken that up to the amount of information that is inside of a paper. So just try and stay with me here for a second. But basically, if you're trying to fatten your turkey up with too much information or too much fat, it could end up backfiring. Even if you think you have all the best sources in the world and you want to incorporate it all at once, your paper and your turkey is only so large. It can't hold all that liquid. Some of it has to come out in order for the turkey to be successful. You don't want a super greasy turkey. You want enough grease that the turkey is flavorful and delicious, but you don't want your turkey drowning in grease, and so much so that it ends up setting the whole thing on fire. So when you're writing your ideas, make sure that you're developing those ideas in a way that is keeping in consideration the size of the turkey, the size of the paper, and the assignments, so that you're not setting everything on fire. Another hugely important process, and one of the last things we're going to be talking about today, is talking about checking the turkey. I've already kind of talked about how sometimes you need to take a step back and evaluate your turkey. You may find you need to baste your turkey more, go back to that research process. You may find you need to add that foil tent in and slow down and let a slower cook go through. But you're not going to know to do those things unless you check the turkey. You need to maybe adjust the temperature. You may need to take out some ingredients, but you have to look at your paper and your turkey with a weathered eye. Many students, when they're writing the paper, may not actually look at the paper and how it's forming until after they've already got a completed draft. And by then, especially if you're on a time crunch, it can be difficult to go back and revise and reshape that work into the turkey or the paper that it was meant to be. So, how I would recommend approaching that would be to kind of consider how the ideas are coming along in your paper by reading through it and evaluating and making sure that it's hitting the assignment criteria. And if it's not, you can then make those adjustments before you get too deep in your 10-page paper, at which point you may or may not realize that it's not fitting the assignment criteria. That maybe you've talked about a topic for 5 pages that kind of went off on a tangent. Checking your paper, checking your turkey helps everything stay on track so that you can serve your turkey on time and turn in your paper so that it's as beautiful and as complete as possible. So that's kind of my best way to relate the cooking of the turkey to the cooking of your paper, or the writing of your paper, I suppose. But I wanted to show you just a couple of quick tech pieces before I left you, just to show you some different things that you can take advantage of as you're going through the writing process. Okay, so this first thing I wanted to show you is the ambient mixer. Um, Basically, it's a web app where you can listen to free audio atmospheres. Sometimes we may get distracted by our roommate talking, but a purely silent room can sometimes be a little intimidating to write in. So this is basically a fan-made site where you can go into, for example, the Hogwarts Library or the Slytherin Common Room and listen to kind of ambient sounds to help you better focus and develop your writing. So I would highly recommend using the site, especially if you find that music is too distracting. I think the ambient noise can help you in your writing process to stay focused and to stay on task. Okay, so this is the Marinara timer. It's another app that helps in terms of helping you stay on task and helps you stay as productive as possible. Um, there's a um, there's a traditional method which runs in a 25-minute cycle followed by a 5-minute break. Basically, that's a way to help you stay focused. If you set this timer when you begin writing, um, it'll time you for 25 minutes and then enable you to also just take a step back and take a break as needed. This is intensely helpful because it kind of keeps you held accountable. Once you have a timer that's sort of screaming at you, like you have to stay working for this amount of time, um, for some reason, we listen to the timer. I can't explain it really, but it totally works. And remember how we talked about how the cook times might vary between the turkeys? In some cases, you might need to customize the timer to match what your needs are. So you can either do like your traditional method or use a custom timer to establish what's going to work best for you. So hopefully those two apps can help you in your writing process to stay focused, but kind of keep these 5 main things in mind um, to consider your cooking time, the incorporation of the foil tent and the basting, um, avoiding that grease fire, and making sure that you're checking on the development and the cook times of your turkey. Thank you guys so much for joining us for today. Next time, we are going to be talking about carving your turkey so you can finally dig into this delicious bird we've been cooking up for the last couple weeks. Thank you again, and we will see you next week.